where we left off, we've been following the life of the Shakyamuni Buddha, the Sakyamuni Buddha, Siddhartha, Gotama, or Siddhattha, Gotama, depending on if you're using the Sanskrit and the Pali. And you'll remember from last week I told you that the Buddha himself did not use Sanskrit in his teachings, as far as we know. Sanskrit, though it's the language of the Vedas and the Upanishads, it was not the language that the Buddha spoke or taught in. The Buddha is from that part of the Indian subcontinent, kind of right at the foothills of the Himalayas, so Nepal. And so the language that the Buddhist scriptures come down, the earliest Buddhist scriptures come down to us in, is Pali. And so even though a lot of us are more used to the Sanskrit terms for reasons that we'll get into later, the oldest Buddhist scriptures use Pali and not Sanskrit. And I'm just like you, I'm more used to the Sanskrit terms. I'm trying to get myself to start using the Pali more, since that's the actual language of their scriptures. So we followed his life as a member of the Kshatriya caste, or Varna, leaving behind that life as a prince to go seek enlightenment or awakening, solution to the problem of suffering or sorrow in the world. Following him through his training under two different teachers, gurus, yogis, and then his time with a group of 5 extreme ascetics, where he even outdid them in their extreme asceticism, to the point that someone would walk down the road and see his emaciated form lying on the ground and think that he must be dead, because nobody could be alive like that. You remember, he said he could put his hand on his stomach and feel his spine. He was so emaciated from the fasting and the extremes of his asceticism. And then he realized that too was not the way. So in some sense, the Buddha, means awakened one. And in some sense, he had more than just one awakening. He had to awaken from the dream or illusion that there is no suffering in the world created by his father, Suddhodana, who had created this kind of palace of pleasure for him, where he would not know any old age, sickness, or death. He had to awaken from that, but then he had to awaken from this tradition of asceticism that in some sense suggested that the way to overcome suffering is to fully immerse yourself, to punish yourself with as much suffering as you possibly can, and try and overcome it in that way. And so he does, and he sits in a place called Bodhi, beneath the Bodhi Tree. All of these named Bodhi, Bodhi Tree, these are names that get projected back, because this is the spot where he becomes the Buddha. And we talked about Mara and Mara's daughters and their temptations of the Buddha, and how he touched the ground, and the earth bore witness to the fact that he was the awakened one. Well, after that time, as he sat beneath the tree, he moved into the various stages of samadhi, of meditative awareness, of consciousness, and each watch of the night. And more was revealed to him. He gained more knowledge and wisdom during this time. One of the things that he gained early on was knowledge of all of his past lives. And this is important because, in kind of American New Age or Western New Age kind of ideas about reincarnation, any old person can go go to the right person, go to the right therapist, and have a past life regression and find out that they were actually Alexander the Great or Queen Elizabeth Tudor. But generally in reincarnation, as it's understood in the Indian religions, you don't know your past lives. You don't get to carry that knowledge with you. So you won't know this. This is something that is special only for someone like Buddha, who has reached this awareness so that he can know all of his past lives. The rest of us don't get to know that kind of thing. And so the stories of his past lives are collected. They're part of that collection of scriptures, the 3 baskets of scriptures known as the Tripitaka or Tipitaka. So this one collection of his past lives form basically the stories that you might use to teach the common person or children. So those of you who were here when we watched Little Buddha last week, you remember that Little Buddha began with a story about a Brahmin and a goat. And the Brahmin was about to sacrifice the goat, and the goat began to weep and then began to laugh. And the Brahmin says, "This is amazing, a weeping, laughing goat. Why are you weeping? Or why are you laughing? It laughed first and then it wept. Why are you laughing?" And the goat said, "Well, for 499 lives I've been a goat who's been sacrificed and had my head cut off. And now I'll finally have paid off the debt, the karmic debt that will free me. And I won't have to be reborn again as a goat to be sacrificed again." And then the Brahmin says, "Well, why are you weeping?" And he says, "Well, because I'm weeping for you, because 500 lives ago I was a Brahmin who sacrificed goats." Right? Now, Buddha wasn't either the Brahmin or the goat in that story. He's kind of another character who's overlooking the whole scene. But those are the kinds of stories in this collection of stories of his past lives. These are stories that are meant to teach. And in fact, what they find, if you read through them, you'll see that there are some stories that sound like fairy tales or tales that we might be familiar with. In fact, there's even one that sounds a whole lot like one of Aesop's fables, which just to remind us how, these kinds of stories spread and the cultures were interacting. Again, we're not talking about self-enclosed systems of beliefs that have no interaction with one another. And so we have these stories of his past lives. He knows all of his past lives, and he goes further into his awareness through meditation. Well, after sitting there beneath the tree, the Bodhi Tree, for about 7 days, having reached nirvana, or in Pali, nibbana, that is the extinguishing. Nirvana or nibbana means to blow out or to be blown out, right? Like a candle. After having reached that, he now has access to the true Dharma or the true Dhamma in Pali. Now, Dharma, we remember from Hinduism, is the way that you're supposed to live, and it's based on your place in the system of Varna and Jati and all of that, right? And whether or not you're male, you're female, whatever. Everybody has a different Dharma. Well, that's not the case in Buddhism. In Buddhism, it's like in Jainism. The Dhamma is one. There's one right way to live, one teaching. And the Buddha achieved that. He understood that. He knew that. Reached that when he sat beneath the Bodhi Tree. And so he now has access to the true Dhamma. But he thinks, I've been around the world a little bit now. I've gotten out of my palace. I've met people of all different levels of society, and I don't know that anybody is wise enough to follow this Dhamma. I don't know that it would do any good for me to go out and teach the true Dhamma. And one of the Devas has to actually come to him and say, please, there are some people, and even some Devas, who don't have as much dust on their eyes, and if they just need you to teach. And if you just teach, if you just do a little bit of teaching, they'll be free also. Lead the way. Go and teach the Dhamma. So he does. But he has to figure out who he's going to teach first. Well, you remember he had a teacher when he first left the palace, Alara Kalama, right? Who had taught him meditation, who had taught him jhana, and he thinks, Alara Kalama does not have much dust on his eyes. I will go and teach him the Dhamma. Well, then he learns from the Devas that, in fact, Alara Kalama died almost 7 days before, so he can't teach him. And then you remember he had a second teacher who may have been a Jain, and he says, well, he doesn't have much dust on his eyes. I'll go and teach him the Dhamma. No, the Devas say, he died this very night. Well, okay. Finally, he remembers the 5 extreme ascetics that he had lived in the wilderness and the forest with, and who had come and kind of surrounded him since he surpassed their asceticism. And he thinks, well, they don't have very much dust on their eyes. I will find them and teach them the Dhamma. And that's what he does. He goes to a deer park near Benares, and he finds them there, and he goes to teach them. Now, what you need to know is that as soon as he ate that bowl brought by the village girl, filled with substantial, solid food, as soon as he had done that, and they saw him do that and regain his strength, they had all been disgusted with him. Oh, you've left the true path. You're such a, you ate a bowl of mushed rice. You're such a slovenly, indulgent person now, and we're going to have nothing to do with you. And so they're already skeptical of him when he arrives. But one of them says, all right, well, let's give this guy a chance. Tell us what you've learned. And he begins what's known as the turning of the wheel of Dhamma, there in the deer park near Benares. And he says, look, the first thing that I've learned is that you will not reach your goal through the extremes. It's not an extreme pleasure or kama that you'll reach your goal. It's not an extreme asceticism that you'll reach your goal. The goal can only be reached by the middle way. And they say to him, well, what is this middle way? What is this middle path? And he says, well, it's the Noble Eightfold Path. And they say, all right, well, tell us about this Noble Eightfold Path. And the Buddha, and he is now the Buddha, so you should know, all the way up until the time he reached his awakening or enlightenment beneath the Bodhi Tree, the texts refer to him as the Bodhisattva or the Bodhisattva in Sanskrit, Bodhisattva in Pali, including his previous lives. That is, he's moving towards nirvana or nibbana, but he's not yet there. Once he reaches his awakening, he's no longer a bodhisattva or a bodhisattva. He is the Buddha. And so he says to them, the first thing you need to know, there are in fact 4 noble truths, and you'll only get to this noble eightfold path, this middle way, once you get to the fourth noble truth. The first noble truth is that life is dukkha, or suffering. Life is suffering. All of life is suffering. Everything is suffering. Being born, growing old, getting ill, dying, being reborn, getting old, getting ill, and dying. All of this is suffering. All of life is suffering. You need to know this truth. You need to face this. This is what my father did not want me to face in the palace. But it's the truth that sets you on the path. All of life is suffering. And not just this life, of course, but the whole cycle of samsara, of being born, dying, and being reborn over and over again is suffering. How are we doing on time, by the way? Yeah, I can't, the reflection on there, I can't see the clock. 10 minutes? Okay. So it's all suffering. That's the first noble truth. The first truth that will set you on the right path is to know life as suffering. The second noble truth is that suffering arises, dukkha arises from desire and clinging or attachment. So you want things. You want a good life. You want pleasure. You want time with your friends and your family. You want children. You want health. You want beauty. You want to live forever. All of these things cause suffering. This is the root of suffering. So you'll often hear Buddhists talk about how Buddha came to understand cause and effect in a unique way. And we'll get into more of that when we talk about the doctrine of anatta or anatman, which we might get to this morning, or we might have to wait until next week. But the point is that suffering arises from attachment and craving or desire. And that's because when you want something, when you desire something, when you crave something, this doesn't just attach you to that thing, but it actually creates this situation of there's an object and a subject. The subject, which is you wanting or desiring the thing that you crave. And it's this bringing into being of the subject, the self, that is the root of suffering. But again, we'll get to that when we talk about anatta or anatman. The third noble truth is that there is a path or a way to the cessation of suffering. Suffering can be ceased. Dukkha can be blown out again, can be ended. And of course, it's ended, you might already see, it reaches its cessation if you have no more clinging, no more attachment, no more craving. If there's no more craving, there's no more you to crave the thing being craved. Right? That's at least where we're going to go with this. And how do you get to that point? How do you get to the point where craving is ceased, where desire ceases to be, and therefore the desiring self is blown out or reaches nibbana? This is the noble eightfold path that you have to walk. Now, I don't have the Noble Eightfold Path memorized, so I'm going to turn to one of my books here. It can be broken up into 3 sections. The Silasika, which is training in morality. Because the first thing that you'll be taught for example, by a Buddhist monk, before you can learn how to meditate or whatever, is you have to get your life right. You have to live right. So the first part of the Noble Eightfold Path is this teaching in morality, or how to live rightly, Silasika. The second part is training in concentration, and the third part is training in wisdom. So Samadhi Sika and Panya Sika. And so here is the Noble Eightfold Path. The first part of the path, the way of morality, or sila, is right understanding, right thought, and right speech. So you have to learn to, in other words, understand the world as it is, think correctly, and speak truthfully. The way of concentration, the second part, or of samadhi, is right livelihood and right effort. So here we're talking about, again, you don't want to overindulge, but you also don't want to go to the extremes of asceticism. So one thing you'll notice is that this was true of the Buddha, it's true of the Sangha, the bhikkhus, the Buddhist monks, is they only eat once a day. Now they don't starve themselves, they don't fast for long periods of time as he did during his ascetical training. They always eat, they eat once a day. But it's always before noon, and it's one meal. And it's whatever they can receive, traditionally through begging, though, I mean, obviously, for example, the bhikkhu in Mechanicsville doesn't go around to his neighbors like it's Halloween and knock on their doors and try and, right. He has local lay Buddhists who provide for him. But he himself does not work for his food. He only eats what he is given. Right, a bhikkhu only eats what is given, and his right effort is in the training of the mind and morality and meditation. And then the final two parts of the Noble Eightfold Path are right mindfulness and right concentration. So again, the meditation is taken from, it's not just what you do at say a given time of day. I'm going to start my day with a little bit of exercise, maybe some Tai Chi and some yoga, and then I'm going to meditate for 15 minutes, and then that's my meditation for the day. At least for the Buddhist who is really committed, for the bhikkhu, for the monk, everything must become meditation. And so this is right mindfulness. So yes, they sit in meditation, but they also walk in meditation. They stand in meditation, or in mindfulness. So I asked the monk, I said, when I met him the last time, I said, thinking along the lines of, the sitting meditation that we might think of when we think of dhyana or meditation. I said, how much time do you spend in meditation each day? And he said, the whole day. Right. So, because everything is focused on right mindfulness. This is the Noble Eightfold Path. There's a whole lot more to it, but this is the way that you walk that will lead to the cessation of craving or desire, and therefore the blowing out of self or soul, that is nirvana or nibbana. And I think, how are we doing time-wise? All right. So we're going to end there, and we'll pick up with Anatta or Anatman next week.